My name is Blair Glencorse. I'm the co-CEO of an organization called Accountability Lab, also the outgoing co-chair of the Open Government Partnership. And it's a pleasure to be here. I have to say, despite all of the challenges that we face, I've been inspired and energized by the conversations we've had over the last day or so. I don't think I'll dwell too much on those challenges. We all know what they are. We've heard a lot about them, except to say that countervailing institutions, independent oversight bodies, the kinds of organizations we're going to talk about and hear from today are a critical piece of our accountability and human rights ecosystems. As the famous legal mind Jon Stewart from The Daily Show once said, to ensure justice, treat everyone equally, especially your enemies, because it will confuse them. And I think that's what we want. We want independent bodies that treat everyone equally, but they are under threat. The World Justice Project Rule of Law Index, which is, of course, where we all go for data on these things, has shown a decline in the factor that measures the independence of these institutions since 2017. There's been a steady decline. And that factor measures whether the legislative branch, national human rights agencies, and audit institutions have the independence and ability to effectively exercise checks and oversight, and whether government representatives are sanctioned for misconduct. And as you can see on the slides behind us, and as you came in, the situation hasn't really improved. In the last index, 59% of countries have declined in terms of the constraints of government power. 62% of countries have got worse when it comes to the limits on executive by the legislative. 48% have got worse in terms of independent auditing and review. And 68% have worsened in terms of government powers being subject to non-government checks. So, my friends, the situation is not good. It's been getting worse for a while. But the good news is we have some incredible people here to help us think through some of these challenges and possible solutions. So let me introduce them briefly. I'll ask them to introduce themselves a bit further as we get into the conversation. To my immediate left, Camilo Benítez Aldana, Comptroller General of Paraguay and Chair of the Latin American and Caribbean Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, known as OLACEFS. Welcome, Camilo. To his left, Alyson Kilpatrick, Secretary of the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions, GANRI, and Chief Commissioner of the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission. Welcome, Alyson. To her left, Utaara Mootu, a Member of Parliament of the National Assembly of Namibia. And on the far left, which is no indication of his political leanings, of course, Roby Sendowich, a Governance Global Practice Manager for Public Administration at the World Bank. One housekeeping point before we start. I'm afraid we're not going to have time for Q&A from the audience. I'm very sorry about that. I'll try and preempt some of the questions that you might like to have asked during our conversation. And you can always engage on social media, of course. The hashtag for doing so is WJ Forum 2025. And I'm sure our panelists will be around afterwards if you'd like to catch up with them one-on-one. Great, so let's jump in. We have all sorts of ground to cover here, and I thought I'd start with you, Camilo, if I can. You began thinking about some of these issues a long time ago as a student on exchange in South Africa. Since then, you've come a long way. You're now in charge of the audit and accountability processes for the government of Paraguay. Could you tell us a bit more about yourself? How did you get to that position? And now in your position, how do you maintain the independence and the effectiveness of your institution? Camilo.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, especially among these distinguished panelists. I'm a lawyer. I'm actually from the academia too, and the judicial power. I don't know what I'm doing in the Comptroller office. I wasn't supposed to be there. It was a political accident, but I'm very proud of the work that we're doing right now, and we have to change a little bit our capacity that will explain as part of a reform, of a legal reform that we had to do. And speaking about independence, or how to protect our office from the threats that the society, the press, especially politicians, had on us. I will say the first step is the legal framework. how to get appointed and how to get fired from the office must be on a constitutional level, and you must protect the General Comptroller or the head of the SAI, the Supreme Audit Institution. This is very, very important. And there is a Lima Declaration that has over 35 years that says that the Supreme Audit Institution, the head of this office, must be very independent of the people they have to control. That's just like common sense, you know, especially from the executive branch. So we rely on Congress. But Congress can also threat our capacities too. So when the procedures of appointments start or begins, we have to have these rules of transparency, especially in the hearings. The hearings must be public. We have to try to prohibit private meetings between politicians and applicants. And I have this story of an applicant from Ecuador. They didn't win the office a couple of years ago, and he told me, you know, that I have this meeting with the senator, and he asked me to help him in some cases and to hire some political operators and to do exactly what he's supposed to fight against. And he said, what can I do? And I said to him, my official answer is you have to call a press conference and tell everyone about this. This is very wrong. And if you want my not official answer, you must lie. You must lie to him. Just say yes and then don't do it. But in either case, it's a practice very common in Latin America. We have the other requirement that I would say we have to try to have autonomy in our budget. And this is a mission that we will never be accomplished by anyone. And I will say in Latin America, but also in other countries of the world, even in the States. I presented a draft of a law that assured me a 0.5% of the national budget in order to control that budget. That would have given me 3 or 4 times the budget that I have right now. Then we could invest in technology and we could improve our capacities. And when I presented the law, everybody agreed with me in those days. And the head of Congress called me privately. He said, can we speak in my chambers because I have this important message to you? And I said, of course, President of the Congress. I said, what's, because he's acquaintance of mine. I mean, I know him personally. So he told me, there is no way we are going to give you this law. I mean, are you mad or something? How do you think that we are going to lose the only control that we have over you? Because every year I have to negotiate with them my budget. And if I run out of budget, I can't do the work, you know. And I have to ask them for more money to fight against the things that they don't want me to fight. So, of course, they will never give me the money. So that's also another requirement. To be independent, you have to have autonomy in your resources. The culture, this is something that I would like to take a couple of minutes to explain. The structural levels of normalization of corruption. We cannot be compassionate with corruption. There's an example that I always use in academia and schools when we talk about corruption, and it's this. Paraguay, I don't know if you don't know, when I lived in South Africa, every time I say, where are you from? From Paraguay. I mean, what? Paraguay? Uruguay? You know, nobody knows Paraguay, but now, thanks of the World Cup and a couple of things, you know, some people know where we are. We are between Brazil and Argentina. You know, we're a small country. 90% of the population lives in the 35% of the territory. And 2% of the population lives in a territory that is like 60% of the territory. It's called the Chaco. Okay, my friend from Argentina will know. The Chaco is a place where a couple of thousand of people live, but we have over 14 million cows there. We have very, very, very big ranches, and we have cattle ranches there. A lot of cows. They are treated for those people that are vegan better than humans, I must say. I mean, it's not something that we look up to, but it's the reality. And there we have, of course, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of horses, because we need horses in order to look after the cows. And there is a disease in that horses has. It's called anemia. Anemia, no? It would be like AIDS for human, the anemia for horses. And why I'm telling you this? Because I want to explain to you the context of a phrase that we always say in Paraguay. If you are a horse and you live in the Chaco, you have to put up and live with anemia, because sooner or later you will get it. You know, if you are a horse and you live in the Chaco, you will have to live with anemia. Corruption is like anemia to us. And the people in Paraguay are compassionate with corruption. They really live with that like it's normal. You know, I mean, it's not in some regions, especially close to Brazil, has nothing to do with the Brazilian people, but it's because we are a lot of trade there in those areas. The people really like corruption, you know, because they are also a very corrupt society. So when you, for example, say this mayor is very corrupt, and you charge him with a criminal charge, they say, so what? You know, I mean, he's stealing money, but he's also a very good mayor. So how do you fight against this, you know, when the structural level of they normalize, you know, kind of how do you do your job? I mean, even and in schools I tell this, can I tell a joke here? Can I?
Another one? Yeah, please.
No, but this is the joke. This is a joke that I always say when I go to high schools and I speak to young people about corruption, so we can understand more or less what I'm trying to explain to you. The joke is this: there is a Argentinian president, a Brazilian president, and a Paraguayan president. They are bragging about how much money they earn. This is not based on a true story, by the way, you know. So this is I mean, it's not true. Just especially for the guys from Brazil that just were here a couple of minutes ago. They are in a meeting and they are bragging about how much money they earn. So the Brazilian president said to the other president, he said, "Do you see that hospital over there?" And oh no, that was a picture. I'm sorry, because they were in the meeting. So I said, "Do you see this hospital here?" And he said, "Yeah, it's very nice. $20 million for daddy. $20 million. And then the Argentinian said, "Do you see this school over here? Do you see? Very nice school. $30 million for daddy." For daddy, we say for daddy like this is like my son, I don't know. And then the Paraguayan said, because they were in Paraguay, "Do you see that bridge over there? $50 million. And the other president looked at him and said, "What bridge?" Precisely, you know, precisely. Okay?
Very good.
Now, this part, I'm not now. This part will upset you very much, but this is an exercise that they will do. If this joke was a sexist joke or a racist joke, nobody would have laughed. And even I was probably Blair and my partners here, they will say, "Please get out of the room." Yeah. If it was a racist or a sexist joke. What I said to the students in this exercise, I'm actually, don't feel bad with yourself. You know, this is a trap. Everybody laughs. But what I said to them, when I tell this joke in Europe and in the northern part of Europe, like in Finland or Norway, I have to clarify, this is not true. But I say to them, nobody laughs. You know why? Because they don't they don't find funny corruption. So what I'm trying to say is that we have compassionate with corruption. In a high level, they will live with it like the horses have to live with anemia. Thank you.
Thank you, Camilo. This is serious business, but I think a bit of humor is always welcome.
Sorry.
But you touched on a number of really important points. Legal frameworks, transparency, autonomy, resources and budget for this kind of work, culture and the normalization of corruption or a lack of integrity. Alyson, let me turn to you. We were talking earlier, started many years ago as part of a band playing Motown on the streets of Belfast. Now you're leading Northern Ireland's efforts in terms of human rights and with Ganry in a larger sense. Does what Camilo said resonate with you, or how are you finding these approaches to maintaining independence and effectiveness of your work?
Firstly, thank you for making me follow that. It's not possible. Can you? I'm not sure you can hear it. That's better, I think. Perhaps if I explain what my institution is first, it makes more sense why we're facing threats against independence at the moment. So I represent a national human rights institution, and that means that we're accredited by the UN and the Council of Europe to be the voice for human rights in our country, our member state. And what we stand for is application of the European Convention on Human Rights, but based primarily on those very fundamental rights like freedom of assembly, freedom of expression. We encourage growth of civic space, anti-corruption, not just in terms of money exchange, but also the small political corruption, and also the corruption within state bodies, or even just the way a private company may exploit its customers. So globally, we're seeing a shrinking of civic space. We're seeing freedom of expression being misused and abused, being misunderstood. We're seeing growing pressure on independence, including from the judiciary right through to organizations like myself, and exposure of human rights defenders. And a national human rights institution is simply a big human rights defender. What we find is that as leaders, if we talk about political leaders, the ones who favor, let me just be blunt, dictatorship, they find human rights and human rights defenders to be their enemy because we unite people. And what we say is that human rights are about the very basic notion of humanity. You don't have to earn them, and you can't have them taken off you. Just if you're a human being with that shared humanity, you're entitled to human rights and essentially to human rights protection. So what we do is we stand in the way of that sort of dictatorship or tyranny. And it doesn't have to be traditional dictatorship. We're seeing it even in the so-called civilized nations, that there is an increasing tendency to shut down the voices of civil society organizations, non-governmental officers, and the public themselves. So we are their voices. We form a bridge, essentially, between government and between people, but we do it in such a way that it can be undermining of that tendency to dictate. What we find in Northern Ireland is that because we were born of the conflict, and we were established pursuant to the Good Friday Agreement, the peace settlement in the late 90s, the notion of human rights became political and became sectarianized because human rights were supposed to take us out of the oppression of one over the other. And they were held onto, therefore, as being a symbol of something that was a community speak rather than something that applied to all people equally. My independence, I'm appointed by government, which immediately undermines independence. However, it's subject to Parliament, so I think that brings me back into a position of independence. But what I find in UK, so I'm a small region within the UK, sandwiched between one European Union member state, Ireland, and now within the UK and no longer part of the EU, so not benefiting from that protection. We are very easy to carve off. And the way they undermine independence of somebody like me is to starve us off our budget. One of our main functions is to investigate and to take to court the government who breaches human rights. What I have to do is go to government and ask for money so I can go to court and sue them another time. And that is exactly what we end up doing. So it creates this imbalance, but one that is absolutely key to what I do. And if I wasn't independent, then I am worth nothing. My institution is worth absolutely nothing. And just at the minute, I've put in a bid for more money because I'd like to see the government one last time in relation to migration. But I'll just finish with this point. Migration has become a proxy for all sorts of other things, including tyranny and dictatorship. Migrants are suffering in the midst of that, including in Northern Ireland, which really should know better because we have benefited from migration and we have benefited from inward migration. It's made Northern Ireland much stronger. But even the UK, which considers itself, a new Labour government, considers itself to be a champion of human rights, is restricting rights if they are claimed by asylum seekers and refugees within Northern Ireland. So we took government to court and we won. And we had that law disapplied in Northern Ireland. Now, what has happened is that because public opinion is being formed by the very dictators and tyrants around the world to fix all of the world's ills on immigrants, we are now pitched against the public as well as against government. And what we have to continue to do is advocate for human rights, for common humanity, despite the fact that people have been told wrongly that one group are a danger to them and their children. So this is the imbalance at the minute that we're really struggling with. And what it also does is it galvanizes government to reduce our funding because the public are suddenly seeing us as being part of the problem rather than part of the solution. I'll leave it there. I know we're going to go on and talk about much more, but I think if I had any message at all, it would be that if you are to be a human rights champion or defender of human rights in any sense, then you must be independent, even if government's appointing you, and particularly if government's appointing you.
Thank you, Alyson. It's a very, very important point, and this point about human rights being inherent for non-citizens as much as citizens, I think is absolutely critical now, more than ever. We're going to touch maybe in a while on this point about narratives and how the public might perceive your kinds of organizations, but I wanted to turn to you, Utaara. Both Camilo and Alyson mentioned that they are dependent on Parliament. You are a parliamentarian in Namibia. You were telling me earlier you also like to dance, so there's a bit of a theme emerging here, and I hope you were at the concert last night. You're extremely young as a parliamentarian. Could you tell us a bit about your journey, how you made it into Parliament in Namibia, and the role that you see for yourself in terms of independent oversight?
Well, thank you very much, Blair, and thank you for according me this very important discussion. Now, my journey is quite challenging because I always say this funny story that, politics, I didn't want to do politics because most young people in Africa look at politics as something that is for elitists and something that is for the elders. So for my journey, I was looking at becoming a lawyer or something else. But then politics then chose me in a sense that I then founded the political party that I'm currently in with the deputy leader. And I was able to become the youngest spokesperson at 21, and I got elected for Parliament at 23 as an opposition member of Parliament, so it was amazing. You can clap hands, you can. Through that journey, we have experienced a lot of oppression. For example, like any ordinary African country, a young democracy of 30 years, we have seen a dominance within executive forces and the one-party legacy within our political party. What that does is that it marginalizes diverse lawmakers and diverse voices. We had events where members of parliament during SONA where a state security came and lifted a parliamentarian, like lifted by the pants, lifting him up and escorting him out of parliament. I myself, just because I was part of a demonstration, protest, I was barred from parliament as they said that I am a threat to democracy. Now again, when the public sees that again erodes public trust in the system itself. And that dominance leads not just to how we debate and how we go through the procedures, but also within the selection of committee leaders. There's a tendency of the ruling party where they try to bulldoze all committees to ensure that we are not able to effectively do our checks and balances there, because now they play the loyalty card on politics. So when it comes to the summoning of specific individuals that are linked to political parties such as the ruling party, it will be much more difficult because executive can just bulldoze and push it aside. We have significant systematic cuts. When I talk about parliament only gets about 1% of the budget, national budget goes to National Assembly. What that does is that we're not able to effectively run our parliamentary hearings, for example, investigations in various issues. We're not able to effectively function as a government body that needs to assert itself in the checks and balances arena. We are underfunded, so that means that we always have this funny say among the chairpersons of committees, it's the tug of war for the best committee to win, because now we're scrambling for the limited resources to see which motions will be pushed through and which committee can work the hardest. And again, it creates internal politics that slows down the pace of everything. Another issue is that within the appropriation bill itself, Parliament is seen as a rubber stamp institution. We're not in the consultation phases when executive brings the appropriation bill. They bring it to us and then they expect us to make slight little changes. But then a part of the changes that we make, you don't get to see that or ensure that the appropriation bill speaks to the demand of the masses. So again, we view it as if we're just here to stamp and executive continues with what they're doing. Another issue is, because of that rubber stamp perception, there is eroded public trust within Parliament of Namibia. About 37% of Namibians feel that they have lost trust in Parliament's ability to effectively enact laws. Secondly, 16% of that population believe that politicians do not speak to the actual issues of what people want. Another 40% believe that all, if not all, including myself, all MPs are corrupt. So the erosion in terms of public trust towards the institution ensures that the executive can continue, pushing us aside, and things can slide because there will not be a public outcry to certain things. I'll give you an example. In my country, there is one of the biggest scandals in corruption. It's called the fish corruption case. And this is where a Minister of Fisheries changed and amended the laws in the Fisheries and Natural Resources Act to allow him overall power in terms of allocating tenders, fishing quota rights, which led to him allocating fishing quota rights to a company in Ireland, and they used that company to loot our natural resources and to provide that to the ruling party. This was only made aware to us as Namibia through Al Jazeera and a whistleblower. And even when we came as parliamentarians trying to amend that very same law, it was rejected because of the dominance of executive, and they played the number cards and they split the vote, rejected that amendment that we had. So again, the ability for Parliament to effectively hold government accountable has completely deteriorated because of that dominance. And then another issue that I would like to talk about is in terms of if Parliament is not able to be the institution that creates laws, that holds government accountable, then the executive becomes the supreme body of government, so that it becomes that arrogance, that then we see that there is corruption that is able to just be pushed aside. So with Parliament, our challenges that we have is that we're strategically marginalized. This is not just because of we are opposition leaders, but we have also seen it within a system from the ruling party, for example. Only the executive is allowed to have bills and to have motions in Parliament because of the chief whippery system. So you have a large number of backbenchers from the ruling party who are not able to object to some of these motions and to effectively contribute to the quality of legislation that we bring out. Another issue that I'll just want to raise is that, funny enough, we were told last year that we're going to be grey-listed. The Executive Minister of Justice came in and she brought to the governor of the head of our Bank of Namibia, it's the National Bank. And they said, you know, you have to come back from recession. We need Parliament to come and assist pushing 11 motions and bills that need to be urgently tabled by Parliament. We just have 1 week. Now, with parliamentarians, we don't have researchers. We have a legal department that is grossly underskilled. So we had 1 week, and majority of parliamentarians are not lawyers. So we had 1 week to look at these very critical laws that will ensure that our country doesn't get grey-listed. We spent a whole night every day debating and trying to rescue the country. What happens later on? We ended up getting grey-listed, even though we effectively pushed this bills as Parliament, again, which says that our role as an effective institution has really become a rubber stamp institution, and it really affects our checks and balances initiatives.
Just to clarify for the audience, in case they don't know, that's FATF grey-listing. What implications would that have for Namibia? What has been the
Well, its implications in terms of trading, implications in terms of financial intelligence, just to ensure that the country is secure in terms of FDIs. There were various issues where, for example, if I can talk about just civil society in my country, it made it very difficult now due to that to open a bank account if you are a civil society. So it means that you're not enabled at a fiscal level to ensure that you can fund some of these projects that you're trying to enact within our country. So again, the grey listing issue has really caused a dent on our financial system. And again, it has affected our foreign direct investment and our economy.
Thank you. And I think we're beginning to see some themes emerging here in terms of independence, in terms of erosion of trust in institutions. And one big one is budget, the finances for all of this. And as you pointed out, Utaara, that has very concrete implications for what you're able to do and the way you're able to play your oversight role. And Roby, the World Bank is an institution that knows about these sorts of things. You were telling me earlier you lived in Cuba for a few years in the 1990s. How did you move from dancing salsa in Havana to the governance global practice at the World Bank? Tell us a bit about your journey. And looking at these issues globally from the bank's perspective, how are you connecting the dots on some of these things, and where do you see the key challenges to independence?
Very good. Thank you, Blair, and thank you, everyone, for being here today. Let me start by saying that there is good news and bad news from what I'm hearing from my colleagues here on the panel, from Camilo and Alyson and Uti, right? So the good news is that Paraguay, Northern Ireland, Namibia are not alone. The bad news is that they are not alone. What we see today is it's very important, this agenda of checks and balances and building checks and balances, institutions as part of a broader ecosystem of justice and the rule of law has been always important, but now is urgent. It's been important for us working in development, international development, because we know that when there is no checks and balances or effective systems of checks and balances, the whole society suffers, investment climate suffers, the opportunities for growth, creating employment suffers, but those who suffer the most are the poor. Because when you don't have these systems of checks and balances in society, the poor don't have other mechanisms or recourse or of coping mechanisms to deal with adversity, with injustice, and lack of equity in society. Those who have more resources in society can be a bit independent from these systems and services that governments and public institutions provide. So first of all, it was always important for us. It's a development challenge. But why is that this agenda became urgent today? And this is a bit of maybe providing some context to the conversation that we have now. And what we are witnessing around the world, and maybe in one of the few agendas where there is no distinction between the North and the South, the East and the West, is that there is a crisis of legitimacy, a crisis of citizen trust in public institutions around the world. We see this in every country, almost every country around the world. Citizens believe in many countries that the system is rigged, that democracies are not delivering for them, that there are those who benefit from the design of the systems, but the vast majority in societies are not. This may be a perception, but this is the perception that citizens have. So citizens are demanding more from governments in a moment where governments have fewer resources to meet the expectations of citizens and the private sector. So that creates even more frustration between the aspirations of societies and what governments can do. And when you have frustration in societies, in political systems, what you have is this lack of trust in institutions, including on the institutions of accountability. So this is the context where we are operating. First of all, there is this lack of trust. Connected to that, what we witness around the world is the emergence of new types of leaderships. New types of leaderships that have been able to create almost like a new social contract between those who govern societies and citizens. The new social contract is not based many times on transparency, accountability, the strength of institutions, checks and balances. It's based on the capacity for delivering. So Camilo was saying, well, the mayor of that particular city may be corrupt, but he delivers. This is what people believe in many countries, right? Yeah, everyone is corrupt, but at least this one is delivering for me. And that is very dangerous for the stability of the political system, it's very dangerous for the agenda of checks and balances. And this new leadership style that we see around the world is not very comfortable with the system of checks and balances. So what you have here is something that is not compatible. Yeah. So you have a society that trusts their leaders and their institutions less. You have new types of leaderships that connect directly with the citizens, many times bypassing all the systems of the representation in society, where the media, which is part of these checks and balances, is not trusted either because they are the creators of fake news. So in that society, in that system that we start to see now, especially when you need more checks and balances, these institutions become weaker. So it's a great paradox, but it's creating this low-level equilibrium as well. Connected to this, it's a very important thing that we see around the world, and many colleagues started to measure this, is the issue of state capture. So what we see in terms of corruption, what we see in terms of the lack of autonomy for oversight institutions, where we see all these symptoms, there is behind that the root cause. What is the root cause? Is state capture. This means that there are some segments of society that were able to capture larger parts of the state or the private sector, of the legislative, etc. And why is that bad? Because that legalizes corruption, that legalizes exclusion. So when Uti was referring to this number of rules and regulations that in your country basically mandate and regulates the interaction between political parties, between the opposition, well, now that becomes official. Yeah. So it's not corrupt anymore. This is now legal. So we are talking about law and the rule of law and the justice in society that has become legalized even when they are not fair and just. And just to, and related to this, what we hear in many countries, Camilo, you are from Paraguay and from Argentina, neighboring countries, but we hear this across and around the world, is a statement that is it's funny, but it's again very, very problematic, which people say in many of our countries: why hiring a lawyer when you can buy a judge? Why hiring a lawyer when you can buy a judge? Wow. So the trust in public institutions that actually need to deal with this issue is also very, very low. So to conclude, I think that we need to see this system or ecosystem of checks and balances as part of a broader system. They are not operating in a vacuum. And these institutions, and many of you are working on these institutions, are going through a very difficult moment, and unfortunately, the close scenario or the close future for this does not look to be very promising.
Thank you, Roby. I think that point about these institutions being part of an ecosystem is a really important one. It's, I think, part of why there are so many different, diverse people in the room today. Your point, I think, is really well taken in terms of legitimacy these days coming from delivery in many cases instead of democracy. The means justify the ends for many decision makers. Let's turn to solutions before we get even more depressed about the situation. Roby, so back to you. These are the challenges. What are the solutions that you're finding? Where is the World Bank seeing green shoots of better independence, greater efficiency, more and more efficiently used budgets for independent oversight institutions? Can you give us a bit of a sense of that?
So let's now switch channels and try to be positive, all of us. First, I think that it's very important, the realization that we have and we see around the world, that the agenda of justice and rule of law is not the agenda of the lawyers. We need to understand that justice is not the only responsibility of justice, is not the ministries of justice and the judiciary. There are many organizations and many actors in society who are responsible and have a calling to actually to produce justice in society, fairness, and rule of law. So that's number one. Number two, you ask about solutions, and we are always tempted to provide recipes, and we need to be very careful on this, because the context of each one of the countries matters, and matters a lot. So what we were able to do is to identify principles that can be applicable to every society in the world, although the specific solution may be different. And these principles are important for building more inclusive institutions, more effective institutions, and more accountable institutions. This is applicable to the institutions of checks and balances and rule of law as well. So the first one is that we want these institutions to have quality. Quality. So the idea that institutions can be very efficient without quality has been demonstrated for many years as not a very good idea. And there is, Camilo, you told a joke. I tell you one joke very quickly. There are two friends, and one tells the other, tell me very quickly, how much is 2 plus 2? 2 plus 2. The other person says, 2 plus 2 is 3. He says, no, 2 plus 2 is 4. And then the friend says, what did you want? Efficiency or quality? So we have this idea that public sector institutions need to be very efficient, and many times we forget that quality matters, and quality is very important for these institutions, Absolutely. The judiciary as well. The second one is access. You can have institutions that have high levels of quality for the things that they do, but they don't provide access to everyone in society. So very important as well to focusing on the access part. Third element, the third principle is, of course, efficiency. You want to make sure that things happen in a timely manner, as there is a famous statement saying that a late or belated justice is not justice, yes. Right? So when something happens many years after, that is not just anymore. And the fourth one is independence. You want, and some of you mentioned this already. So just to summarize and respond your question, which is very concrete examples, first is the use of technology. Through the use of technology today, big data, also artificial intelligence, we are able to identify fraud, corruption, collusion. There is a very interesting example we have from Brazil, where by tapping into public databases that are in the public domain and crossing information, you can identify red flags. Red flag is not corruption per se, but it's showing you that there may be corruption. For example, if you have somebody who is a recipient, an individual who is a recipient of social welfare, and the same person is a contributor to the political campaign of the government, and the same person has a company that is procuring for government contracts, but is receiving also social welfare, something is wrong there. It doesn't smell good. And then when you cross that with the database of where the company, that supposedly existing company is established, and you see that it's in a slum or a favela, something is not good. So all that information already exists. Nobody's creating new information. The data is there, but the trick, as my colleague Manuel Ramos always says, is how is that you convert data into information? Technology can help us for that. The second element that we see in many countries is participation and social accountability. And this, Blair, you are very familiar with this agenda. And this breaks this idea that everyone in government is corrupt and everyone in civil society is clean. So basically, having the chance to build a constructive engagement between somebody who is a reformer in government, somebody who wants to do the right thing in government, who most of the time does not have all the political capital that you need, by having somebody in civil society monitoring what you do to actually giving you more political power to do your work. And the final point, of course, is about access to information and making information public. So you will be surprised in so many countries still today, for example, the rulings of the judicial are not public, are not made public. So people don't know how judges rule systematically. Only by having information public and open, so people can have maybe some basic statistics to know that particular judge, is there a pattern of ruling over time, can put more light into the system and bring some solutions.
Thank you, Roby. Really, really interesting. You touched on social accountability, Alyson. I wanted to turn to you, if I may, and ask how you work with civil society and how you work with other independent oversight bodies to help defend each other and find ways to change the narrative around what you're doing.
I think the first thing we have to do is to convince everyone that we should work together. And that includes, you can't engage with civil society and with members of the public without also engaging with government and the state agencies, because you need to be able to follow up on what you promise to deliver if you engage with people in civil societies. If you go to them and ask them what their concerns are and then don't actually do something about their concerns, then you've denied yourself opportunity for future engagement. I think once you do, though, engage, you need to find the common ground, common objectives, what it is you all want to, or what you're at least able to agree on as being priorities. And I think, maybe I would say this, but I think the human rights framework, that idea of common humanity, fundamental rights, is the perfect way to unite people. And it is something we all have in common. We may sometimes have different understandings about what it means and whether my rights are just as important as some other human being's rights, or whether that other human being's rights can be diminished for the greater good. But that's through education, I think. Also, if you're talking about civil society, I think you have to enable them to engage with you. So it's too easy to simply go out to organisations and say, this is what we do. we're very good at it. Support us, and we'll continue to do this. You really have to enable them to come to you with ideas. You have to help support them in reaching members of the public, particularly those who maybe don't normally engage, so the marginalised people, people who have difficulty with access, people whose first language isn't English in our case. And that you can do not just through funding. In fact, we don't really have any money to fund anybody, just about managing to keep ourselves going. But you can do it in all sorts of other ways, by making premises available, by educating. We go into schools. We have this terrific schools program now with primary and secondary schools. And for those who don't know our system, it's up to 18. So from the start of school up to 18. And we send people in to engage with children about the issues that they have, and we talk to them on their level. But we follow up with them. So we continue to monitor and see if it's been effective. And if it's not, we listen. We listen to criticism as well ourselves, because if we are to put ourselves in a position to criticize others, I think we have to be able to take that criticism and accept that if we're not reaching people, then we're failing somehow. We've missed something. So we have to be prepared to change. I thought it was really interesting that talked about lawyers not being the securers of the rule of law. That's absolutely right. Lawyers and organisations like mine should be the very last resort at upholding the rule of law, because it's probably too late at that stage. We uphold and protect against individual or group violations, but unless you have, for example, all the people on this stage and those in the audience already bought into the principle of the rule of law, and that they are not above it, however high their status may be, then the lawyers are really only mopping up after the events and sort of repairing the damage. I think engaging also means, and this is what I was referring to earlier about, sometimes the issues can pitch us against the majority of the public, because there are certain issues which, due to, I don't want to blame social media for everything, but often issues are inflamed through social media. We have got to protect those minority groups who are vulnerable, because nobody else will, the majority will not. And that can make it very difficult then to engage with civil society, because they disagree with even the principled position we take. And I use, for example, immigrants and also trans people and gender diverse people and the LGBTQI communities. At the minute, there seems to be a campaign to undermine their validity within the human rights framework. And the public have been swayed by that. But we have got to continue to engage with them, listen absolutely to what they're saying, but also be prepared to push back even against the public, who ultimately we draw on for our support. And we have to champion those issues and those people who are not popular with the public. So it's realistic, robust, continuing to engage, not just seeing them once a year or twice a year, not just having meetings with them, but real proper engagement where they are and at their level, but taking the difficult issues to them as well.
I think that's a really important principle for any government agency. How can we create feedback loops with citizens to ensure that their voices are heard as part of these issues and of decision making? Camilo, I wanted to turn to you on this piece around narrative and how you seize the narrative, how you help to justify the value of your institution. You seem like a media savvy person to me. How do you think about that? Do you release reports to the media? How do you get people onto your side to push for the aims that you have?
From a perspective of a general controller that controls the budget, we must extend our capacity and not only look at that. You have to look what consequences has some investment, some political investments. I will give you an example. We saw in Paraguay the budget in education, and we look at the schools that had food in poor areas, in rural areas especially. Those schools that had food given like breakfast or lunch, there are more students, and the students were more focused. because if you're hungry, you cannot learn. So we presented this management audit or performing audit that helps the government to change the policy, you know. And like right now, there's a new law that's called Zero Hunger that gives 2 million plates every day, and it's improving a lot. We increased the number of students, 15% in rural areas. What I'm trying to say is we don't have to focus only in the technical spending of the budget. We have to also see, you know, how change the life of the people and how we protect ourselves. Like you said, we have a lot of support of the citizens. It's something that Robbie said, and I wanted to make a joke and say, can I just say what he said, you know? But transparency, it's for the public sector. This is a phrase that I didn't invent, but I always say it. Transparency is for the public sector what is the market for the private sector. So it's a requirement that is absolutely necessary. So in order to improve, you know, the strategies, I will say you have to create data, open data to everybody, platforms, and put all the informations available to the people, but everything. I am one of these guys that all the public servitors, they hate me, because even our private wealth, you know, you have to be available to everybody, so the people can also control us.
Excellent. And one big constituency, of course, is young people, Utaara. I wanted to maybe finish this round with a bit of a focus on young people in particular. How can we better engage younger generations in all of this? So much of the hope for the future rests with them. What would your sense of that be?
Well, young people bring and provide a different perspective to oversight bodies, that's a fact. But however, we have seen a growing decline within representation, not only in Africa, but globally. If you look at the IPU statistics, it's about 2.8% of young parliamentarians represented globally. That, again, those statistics give me sleepless nights, because that tells me there's a significant gap between those that are affected by bad governance decisions and the decision makers themselves. And that's particularly the young people, who are one of the growing largest populations in the world. So how do we incorporate them through this? For example, I would like to use a mixture of Namibia and some of the neighboring countries in South Africa and Zambia, for example. And in Namibia, we have about 24% of young people within our current parliament. And what that has done is that it's shifted the dynamics, because we do not see things from a political landscape. We look at what we both can agree is what is a necessity for youth development. We do not hold historical grudges, as the elders would do. We always make jokes that the elders are in their feelings, but we are more, focus-driven in terms of what we want for young people. So what that led is to the establishment of a youth parliamentary caucus, where we were able to deliberate policies that enhance youth democracy, youth participation and development within our country. That has led also into the drafting of a youth council, advisory council, that is a mouthpiece for government directly to ensure that youth policies are institutionalized. This is some of the practices that we have done in Namibia. And if we can replicate that and move away from parliament, for example, use the youth quota system within the Anti-Corruption Commission, perhaps we can use the quota system to ensure that we have more young observers within the boards. If we look at the auditor systems, perhaps we can have a mentorship, fellowship program within audit systems where we can help enrich and empower young auditors. If we can look at the Human Rights Commission, for example, we can then implement human rights youth desks that will directly talk and deal with student activists to ensure that there is a youth perspective in all the issues that we are bringing into. We can perhaps say that many countries have already started these initiatives, but it has not been enhanced. It needs to be fast-tracked to ensure that young people are incorporated more. And another space that I would like to look into is Namibia again. We have had a wonderful initiative of the Children's Parliament. Now, this is an initiative that served to ensure that we create young policymakers that initiate protectionist policies around the well-being of children. And I must tell you, Blair, I myself have sat in one of those sessions, and the insightfulness in the debate and the robustness of the debates of those children and the contributions, one might say, might give an ordinary politician a run of his or her money, because they are very, very much informed with what they want. And we have been able to use some of the resolutions that emanate from that Children's Parliament and incorporate it within some of our policy decisions within Parliament. Another institution that is really underlooked is the outside of the formal institutions or student institutions are student bodies, for example. Within our political parties, we have youth leagues, for example, and then we have civil society institutions that look at young people's demands. If we are able to move the conversation away from boards and meetings and look at the impact that young people can do, I'll give an example. In my country, there was a protest for Shut It All Down. This was an organization that wanted to fight for the increasing rates of gender-based violence within Namibia. What that led was increased pressure on policymakers that they used social media, Twitter, they used Instagram to put pressure, and they went out on the streets. And this ensured that government and put pressure on government to look into gender-based violence initiatives and increase budget allocations towards dealing with gender-based violence. That's one of the success cases that we have. It shows that sometimes the solutions does not lie here in board meetings. It lies in the streets, in the protests, the young people that have the ideas, but not necessarily the platform. So that's why it's important for oversight bodies to have open dialogues with many of these journalists, civil society leaders, youth leaders that are outside of these institutions that might not necessarily have the opportunity to, via law, or to be directly holding government accountable, but to open the playing field to more. I would look at the elections, for example. When we increase, for example, myself, I am in power, and I'm responsible to ensure that I enact laws and create a political climate that enhances the will for young people. We have seen that example in Zambia, where the voters' turnout for young people was extremely high, and that led to an overturn of government where they felt that the old regime did not serve them, and they voted for a government that had more promising reforms. That shows the power that young people have when we participate in checks and balances, when we hold government accountable. So the most important thing is we cannot go I would say that we cannot really be successful as institutions of checks and balances if we continue to leave out the largest segment of our population, and that's the young voice.
Thank you, Utaara. We're out of time, everyone, but I think that's an amazing segue into a short video we're going to see about one of the winners of the World Justice Project's challenge last year, an organization in Brazil called Politize, which works on precisely these issues, youth engagement and civic activism. Let's watch the video.
In 2013, millions took to the streets. Young people rose up, but one question lingered. What happens after the protest? That's when we realized without civic education, democracy can't hold. In Brazil, the lack of preparation for democratic life is, ironically, the most democratic thing there is. We were never taught to be citizens. We live as individuals. Disinformation, authoritarianism, and intolerance are on the rise, and many still believe politics has nothing to do with their lives. That's why Politize was born. Since 2015, we've been empowering citizens through content, campaigns, and educational programs that are free and non-partisan. Today, We are the largest civic education organization in Brazil. Our digital content and campaigns have already reached almost 200 million people across Latin America. Even though it's not part of the mandatory curriculum, we bring civic education into schools. Over 17,000 teachers already use our materials, reaching more than 200,000 students across the country. We also train young leaders to drive change in their communities. They vote, get involved, influence policy, and create real solutions to local issues. Over 3,000 leaders trained in 10 years. That's a new generation of informed citizens committed to democracy. Now, we are going beyond borders. Our mission is expanding. Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina already have their own polities platforms, bringing civic education to Spanish-speaking audiences. Want to be an active citizen? Start with education. With quality knowledge and democratic values, you can elevate your role in society. We've already begun, and we were honored as winners of the World Justice Challenge 2024 in the Youth Engagement category. And you? Do you want to be a citizen or just an individual?
Thank you so much, everyone, for your active listening. I think that's the key question to leave us with. Do we want to be citizens or just individuals? Thank you to our panel, Camilo, Alyson, Utaara, Roby. We're breaking for lunch. I think we have an hour, and then the working groups will be at 1 p.m. Thank you so much.